Sarah.
Melissa.
What are we reading today?
We are reading Intermezzo by Sally Rooney.
Can't wait. You have been on the move this fall. I've been tracking your location throughout the last few months. You've been crossing national borders, or at least one national border in different places. What have you been up to spreading love for the podcast in various spots this fall?
Yes, I certainly have. So I just came off of 2 back-to-back trips to Canada, happily. One in September, mid-September, I went to Chelsea, Quebec for a little spa weekend. And then in October, I ended up in Newfoundland. Unfortunately, not in Corner Brook where you are, Melissa, but in St. John's. And so, yes, 2 trips, and certainly, and somewhat unexpectedly, ended up really promoting the podcast. And I have a couple little funny stories that I definitely kind of want to share with you about some of my interactions with some unexpected people about the podcast. So, because certainly, any people that I knew that I was visiting in both Quebec and St. John's, family members, friends, certainly sharing the love for the podcast and doling out stickers. I always have them on hand in my purse. But yeah, I had these kind of unexpected and I think really adorable, lovely little interactions with some strangers where we ended up talking about the podcast. So
I can't wait to hear them too, because we often joke that one of the reasons we started this podcast is so that we could actually keep in touch, that like our families are more receptive to us being like, we need to catch up by recording and preparing a podcast instead of just like scheduling hour-long phone conversations with each other, which we absolutely could do. And you have been telling me like multiple times through both of these trips, like, I can't wait to tell you this funny story that happened in a cafe, and I can't wait to tell you this funny story that happened to me in Toronto. And well, we haven't gotten around to it outside of the podcast, so these stories will be highly anticipated for me and all new to me and the listeners and viewers now. So can't wait to hear it. Go for it.
Yeah, there is that whole thing, like save it for the pod, save it for the broadcast, like so that it can be fresh and we can have some real genuine reactions. But I'll start with my trip to Quebec. And so this trip was mid-September. I went with my cousin Trina, who lives in Kingston, Ontario. We met up in Chelsea. It's about a 2-hour drive for her. It was about a 7-hour drive for me, but that's all right. I love a good road trip. And we essentially spent the weekend in Old Chelsea, which is this really charming and small, quaint little downtown area. And when I say quaint, I mean quaint. Very small. And we ended up going to Spa Nordique, which is also located in Chelsea, which was really unexpectedly amazing. I didn't really do my research before we went because she planned the whole thing, and very impressed. But in any case, while we were in Chelsea, the first morning that we were there, we went to this little cafe called Tonique. Super adorable, sat out on the porch, and our waitress came out, our server, and immediately clocked her outfit. I was like, that's super stylish, probably can't pull it off, but she was wearing this lovely long floral straight skirt. And then she was wearing a t-shirt, and it had like a little like kind of midriff top, like little knot. And she just looked super stylish, just this kind of cool t-shirt and skirt look. But what really drew me in was the actual image on the t-shirt. So it was an illustration of a woman wearing sunglasses, kind of laying back and reading a book. And the cover of the book was super prominent. So you could see the name of the book, the author. And I thought, well, for one, super cool image, especially for someone who loves reading books. 2, it looked really familiar, the cover of the book. Like I didn't like automatically recognize the author's name, but I thought, God, that looks familiar. Like I've seen it from somewhere. So this server is reading the specials to us. And here I'm like sizing her up and down. And when she finishes up, I say, I love your shirt. That's such a cool shirt. And she, super friendly, is like, oh, I found it on Etsy. It's this really cool artist. And you can kind of customize your shirts with different images of, you can pick the woman that's on the shirt and skin tone, hair color and texture, and then lots of different options in terms of the books. And she said, I picked this particular book because the author is from close to where I grew up. And one of her books, not the book that was depicted on the shirt, but one of her books, I guess, was set where she grew up. And so she found this shirt on Etsy and wore it. And she went back and I was like, that's great. She went and, put her order in, and my cousin and I are talking and I'm like, God, that looks familiar. And so I just had this thought of like, I think Melissa's read this book. And so I went onto our could read, should read, must read Instagram, and I pulled up the image of you, Tom, and the kids on your way to PEI.
Yes.
And all of you with your respective PEI set books. And it was the exact book that was on her shirt. So it was
Some hellish.
This Summer Will Be Different by Carly Fortune.
Oh, it was the one that I'm holding in the picture. That is hilarious.
That was the book. And so when she came back, I was like, I have this podcast. I have one of my best friends, and I was like, the funny thing is the book looked familiar, but I wasn't super familiar with the author. And so I actually showed her the Instagram post. I was like, this is my friend Melissa. They're on vacation PEI. And look, she's like, this is the book she's reading. It's the book that's on your shirt. And anyway, I ended up giving her a sticker and telling her about the podcast. She said she would listen. And it was just this really lovely little exchange. And we talked about books and reading, and she encouraged me to read some of Carly Fortune's. She said she hadn't read This Summer Will Be Different, but I believe it might have been Meet Me at the Lake was the book that she had read, and it was set close to where she lives. So anyway, I just
so
thought
she's
that
not
was
from PEI, so she's from like Ontario or something.
She's from Ontario, yeah.
Wow, that is so interesting. Like, I love that story. And it also kind of reminds me of, so earlier in the year when we were talking about like our reading goals for 2024, and of course we are approaching the end of 2024, so I have been like reflecting a little bit on that, and also anticipating like what will my reading goals of 2025 be. But we talked a lot about like being readers who are in a conversation with other readers, right? Like, and really we were mostly talking about how we would do that through the podcast and how we would do that through social media, which I think hands down we absolutely have. And even just this week alone, like someone just out of the blue texted me about a Matt Haig book that they had read, and because they saw the stuff on the social media and had listened to this, it's an audio-only episode, so head over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts to hear that one. But just people just out of the blue contacting me to like engage about these books, and I was really excited about that. But then for you to have like a conversation with an unknown reader, like this reader who is just your server, and then you end up having this cool conversation with them, like it is such a neat little like secret society of readers that we have and we can connect with. That's amazing.
I have no idea if she ended up listening to the podcast, but or if she'll, because this is on Rogers, and so maybe she'll spot it on her local Rogers channel. But I just want to give a shout out, Francesca from Tonique, and she was getting married at the end of October or mid-October. So congratulations on your wedding. And and it was just such this like lovely little exchange, and I just was like, this is so heartwarming, and like a way that the podcast like kind of helped me connect with this like random person, like you said, like the secret society of readers. And then my second story happens to occur during my trip to Newfoundland. Unfortunately, or maybe in this case fortunately, because I did feel like it was somewhat serendipitous, Newfoundland is a tough place to get to. So flying from the United States, I flew from Boston, which is about an hour and a half from where I actually live. So an hour and a half drive to the airport. And then I had 2 really long travel days, which definitely goes to this book and how I came to read this book, which we'll get into later. But long travel days, multiple stops, no direct flight. I think I did Boston. What was it? Boston to Toronto, Billy Bishop, and then Billy Bishop to Halifax, and then Halifax to St. John's on my way. And then on my way back, it was supposed to be St. John's to Toronto Pearson to Ottawa, and then Ottawa to Boston. And it was going to be another super long day. Well, of course, leaving St. John's, flight was delayed. I get into Toronto Pearson as my flight to Ottawa is taking off. Like we probably
Nice.
passed each other as I was landing in the plane. And I get off and they're like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's try to get you, we're going to get you home. We'll figure out how. They could not get me on any other flights to get to Boston until 7:00 that evening from Toronto Billy Bishop. So a different Toronto airport.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant I arrived in Toronto at 9:30 in the morning. So that meant I was in Toronto from 9:30 in the morning until 7:00 at night on Thanksgiving Monday.
Right.
So I was like, okay, this is great. And I was also sick. So we can just add that in to just really make it that much more interesting. So I ended up having to take a train from Pearson into downtown Toronto and then make my way over to Billy Bishop so that I could get my ticket printed and make sure that everything was on the up and up. And then I just had this day.
Where were your bags?
Luckily, I had just carry-ons.
Oh, okay.
So I had a backpack and I had a little rolling tiny suitcase. So
that we're spending the day with you touring Toronto.
I know, I was a real tourist. Now, luckily, I had been in Toronto before and had flown in and out of Billy Bishop and kind of understood the layout of downtown. So once I got into whatever it was, Central Station, whatever the train station is in downtown Toronto.
Union Station, maybe?
Probably Union Station. I feel like that's a pretty typical train station name. But I was able to I knew where to go. I knew how to get to Billy Bishop. And I actually walked, which was silly. I could have taken a shuttle that would have saved me about a half an hour, but I got to walk and it was
And you had plenty of time by the sounds of the timeline.
So once I got checked in at Billy Bishop, I was like, okay, I'm good there. I know that everything is set for my 7 p.m. flight. I've got all this time to kill. I'm just going to wander around Toronto. And that's what I did all day. And so I was like, I'm going to get myself a really good meal. And so I think it's called Cafe. I'll have to look it up and tell you what the name of, not that anybody cares about the cafe that I went to, but I was looking around because I had eaten at Momofuku when I had been to Toronto last time and a couple of other spots, but I was like, I want to do something different. And I happened upon this cafe and it looked jumping and it had a really cool decor. And I was like, this looks like the spot. I'm going to go there. And I'm waiting in line. I'm a single. And so I'm like, okay, wherever they put me is fine. And they ended up putting me at a counter. They asked if that was fine. I said, that's cool. And there were a couple other fellow single patrons that were sitting next to me. And we had been in line together. And there was some confusion about how to put your name in because it was electronic. And who to talk to. So we were all kind of talking amongst each other anyway.
Spending Thanksgiving together.
Spending Thanksgiving together. So it's me and then 2 gentlemen on either side of me. And we're silently eating our meal. One of them I clocked had a Cormac McCarthy book with him. He was reading Blood Meridian. So I was like, that's interesting. And then the other guy was just kind of doing his thing. And then the middle guy between the 3 of us, he asked about our meals. He's like, how's your meal? Did you enjoy it? What did you get? And so we all started chatting away and we talked about where we were from. So the gentleman in the middle, his name was Paulo, originally from Brazil and living in Montreal, but in Toronto for business. I think he actually works as a director in some kind of pharmaceutical or medical supply sales. He was telling us all about it. Super chatty, super friendly guy. He was the one that was definitely initiating the conversation. And then the other guy that was sitting on the other side, his name was Sean. He's from British Columbia. and he works like I think in like for the Ministry of Finance or something. And but he was new to Toronto. Like I think he's only lived there for a couple months, so he didn't even know where to go. Like he had never been to that restaurant before. And so the three of us are just kind of talking about like our lives, what we do for a living. And then towards the end, Paulo, he gives us his business card. He's like, look me up on LinkedIn. And so I was like, Sarah, are you going to actually do this? Because I didn't have a business card, but what did I have?
You had stickers for the podcast.
And so I said, well, I don't have any business cards on me, guys, but I do have stickers for the podcast. And so they were so lovely and genuine. And they were like, what podcast? Like, what do you do? And so I told them it was, it was a literary themed podcast, told them the name of it. Of course, they had their stickers that I had given to them. And we started talking about books. It was so sweet. And so Paulo talked about his favorite story. He said that, he speaks multiple languages, like Portuguese is his first language. He speaks French, he speaks English. I think he speaks a couple of other languages too. But he was telling us about this book called Roscoe, and he couldn't remember the name of the author, but I looked it up afterwards, and it's by William Kennedy. It's a story about basically like the Democratic political machine in Albany, New York during like the late 60s and early 70s, but it's a fictionalized version of something that really happened. But he said that for whatever reason, it was just his favorite book, the way that it was written, and he encouraged us to read it. And then we ended up talking a bit more about like Cormac McCarthy. And then I, ever so confident, because I've never actually read any Cormac McCarthy. I feel like that's a crime. But because we were trying to describe the type of books that he writes, because I know enough about the guy. I know like the tone and the subject matter that he usually writes about between Blood Meridian and The Road. And then I talked about the film No Country for Old Men. I'm like, yeah, that's based on a Cormac McCarthy novel. And I said it so confidently. And then I was like, I really hope I'm right, because I'm going to look like a real dummy to these guys if they like fact check me after our conversation.
Are you right? I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't looked it up.
Oh. You're like, I want to live in this bliss as long as possible. Well,
I want them to think I was a smarty pants, like, not only knowledgeable about books, but also film as well. But anyway, we just had this like impromptu, lovely discussion about books and what books mean and what we love. And it was with these two strangers from totally different parts of the country, parts of the world, me, an American, a guy from Brazil, a guy from British Columbia, Canada, and here we are sitting together in a cafe on Thanksgiving Monday, just having this chat. And if I'd never brought out those stickers, we wouldn't have had that part of the conversation. We still would have talked about what we did for a living and all that. But it was just like that moment alone, even though I was sick and I was like in Toronto for this whole day with nothing to do, I was like, this made it all worth it. Like having this interaction. And it was so just beautiful. This really special moment that I'll like remember forever. And I totally added Paulo in LinkedIn.
Well, on that day when you messaged me, you were like, I can't wait to tell you this story. You're like, it has restored my faith in humanity. I was like, oh, this is going to be a real gem. And it's funny
and
because...
It also,
no, sorry. You go.
Ahead. Oh, I was going to say, and it also is like one of the reasons, and not that this is a uniquely Canadian experience, but I did think about being in Toronto, which is like, the biggest city in Canada. And then I thought about being in a place like New York City. And no offense to anybody from New York City, but I don't know that conversation would have happened. Honestly, I really don't.
Yeah,
and I just like attributed that to where I was and who I was speaking with. And not that like Paulo is from a different country, he's from Brazil, but that's like this idea of like that kind of cultural mosaic and like this, like, I don't know, like it's this association that I have with like being in Canada. And I don't know, it was just like, and even like in the interaction with Francesca and in Chelsea, Quebec, like it was just these lovely moments. And I'm like, it made me so grateful that I went on those trips and that I had those interactions. And
I guess there is, I'd like to think, just like an openness to that type of discussion, right? That you're in an environment with like relatively diverse, and that you're like, but everyone felt like safe and open to like pursue a
Yeah.
conversation about books. And I love this. I want to get a t-shirt made that says like Secret Society of Readers or something, because I do feel like now there's like this like little, well, not now, there's always been, I guess, like a subculture of readers, and that they can connect about things. And you know, obviously you said you haven't read any Cormac McCarthy, but it is sort of like when you are part of that circle, you do tend to kind of know about books, even if you don't necessarily have like an intimate knowledge of the book itself or haven't even read the book. We were talking about Cormac McCarthy like within this last week at our house, because I was sort of telling the kids like to make a joke of it, but also like confessing to Tom that when we had first gotten together, I decided to read The Road, which is, I'm going to say confidently by Cormac McCarthy, but I am like 99%
No,
sure
it
that's
is. That I am 100%.
So I remember reading that, and it was like a book that he had, and I was like, oh, hey, can I borrow this? And it was like, I hated it. And I was like trying to impress him, to be like, look at me reading Cormac McCarthy. I'm so impressive. But yeah, so all of this happened on your trip to and from St. John's. And all the while, you were reading Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, which is what we're going to talk about now. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that this book is highly anticipated, or has been highly anticipated. I mean, Rooney has like a cult following based on her previous books, and not to mention the fact that Normal People was such a smashing success as a televised series. So in your case, were you really pumped about this book coming out? Were you like counting down days until the release? How do you feel in terms of your like excitement level for the release of this book?
So I'll be honest. So first of all, my relationship with Rooney, I've read all 4 of her books now. So Conversations with Friends, Normal People, Beautiful World, Where Are You, and now Intermezzo. And coming into Intermezzo, like I was certainly aware that it was coming out. I saw, lots of articles. Of course, the algorithm, because it knows that I'm a Sally Rooney fan, was definitely feeding me information about Intermezzo coming out. And I did think I will read that book, but I wasn't super excited about it, if I'm being perfectly honest. And that's really purely because the book that came out just before it, that I had read, because I did read her books kind of in chronological order as to when they were published, I read Beautiful World, Where Are You? And I did not like that book. Like if we were to talk about, whether it was a could read, should read, must read, like firm could read.
Agree.
Like I did not like that book. And I did enjoy Conversations with Friends, and I loved Normal People. And so it was a real letdown, especially coming off of Normal People and then reading Beautiful World, Where Are You? And then just being like, ugh, just not into it at all. And so even though I knew I was going to read at Intermezzo, it wasn't like on my TBR, like as soon as it comes out, I got to get my hand on a copy. But I happened to be at our local library returning some books. And this was about a week before my trip to St. John's. And I knew that I needed to get a book, that I was going to bring a book with me for the trip. And so as I'm dropping my books off, I glanced at the new release section just to see if there was anything that kind of piqued my interest. And Intermezzo was sitting right on the shelf. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so surprised that this is just sitting here and that there wasn't like a wait list for it, because I know with some other books that I have looked for in the past from the library when they were new releases, like you were on a wait list, like you were going to have to be, just waiting for the people in front of you to get through it first before you got your hands on a copy. So I just thought, this is here. I do want to read it, I guess, if this is the book I'm going to get. And then I looked at the number of pages, and there are, I think it's like 400 and we'll say like 430, 440, somewhere around that. So I was like, this is going to be a hefty book. It's probably going to tide me over for both long travel days. This will work out well. And so I even held off on even reading it like before I started my trip. Like I did not start it until I was in the airport, maybe even on the plane, getting ready for my first flight. And what's crazy about it is I had a long, like 10-hour travel day, but by the time I was in Halifax for my last flight, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to finish this book before my flight from Halifax to St. John's gets in because I flew through the book. Like, I probably ended up reading about 400 pages of that book in one day.
Amazing.
And without, we will get into to the details about the book and what I liked about the book or what maybe I didn't like about the book, but I feel like that is a testament to the book itself, is that I just flew through it. Like like the pages just turned themselves.
Oh, I love that feeling too, when you're just kind of plowing through
Yeah.
and it's like you're hungry for more and you just want to keep
Yeah.
going. So I will say, unlike the last Rogers episode that we did, which was Fates and Furies, and I was spoiling this book left, right, and center, we cannot do this time because I have my copy of Intermezzo right here next to me, and I fully intend to read it with a very similar kind of entry point as you in terms of loved conversation with friends and normal people. Very much disliked. I can't even. The title is "Hello, Beautiful World.
Beautiful
Where are
world,
you?"
where are
Whatever.
you? I know it's a
That
weird
was
one.
just a mess. And then, so looking forward to this one, planning to read it. So you can't spoil it, but are you able to give a summary?
I certainly am. And you just caught me with my my
paper
Duncan. America does run on Duncan, to all of our Canadian watchers out there. So essentially, this book, Intermezzo, is really the story of two brothers, Peter and Ivan Kubek. Peter is a 32-year-old solicitor or lawyer. His brother Ivan is 22 years old, and he is kind of like a chess prodigy and recently graduated university student. They live in Ireland, as all Sally Rooney characters do. And the book opens, and their father has just passed away. He had a prolonged bout with cancer, and it was you never really get to know him. You don't see him. He's already passed away before the book starts. And really, you could say that this is kind of a story about the two brothers, their inability to kind of come to terms with their father's passing, and then the relationship that they have with one another. I would say that's like really at the heart of the story, but it's really the story of relationships in general, which I think is such a kind of Sally Rooney go-to. They're always about relationships and the complexities of relationships and communication and what goes wrong and what goes right and what people struggle with. And so even though at the heart of the story it's these two brothers, Peter and Ivan, it's also about their respective romantic relationships as well. And so Peter has really two primary relationships that we learn about in this book. He has a relationship with Sylvia, who was really, for all intents and purposes, like the love of his life. And I mean, he's only 32, so God knows. But up to this point, and he had met and started dating her while they were in university together. And they were, they were really on track for kind of spending their lives together, getting married, having children, and really happy with one another, well suited to one another. And at some point, Sylvia is in a terrible accident that essentially impacts her reproductive organs, and so she's unable to have sex, and she's unable to have children, and it's a devastating injury to her, and it ends up really being the main reason why she breaks up with him. And so when we meet Sylvia, she is still in Peter's life. They're friends. Peter really is still in love with her, but they're just friends, and that's kind of where that relationship is. And so we see them a lot together having conversations. She knows everything about his life. She knew his father. She's close with his brother Ivan. Like, she's kind of like this glue in his life that, like, throughout the course of the book feels like it's kind of coming unraveled. And then Peter also has this relationship with a girl named Naomi. She's a 21-year-old university student. She is someone that he has, I think, very strong physical attraction to. Their relationship has really kind of revolved around sex. And it's also a relationship that Peter is very uncomfortable with. I think because of her age, because she's 21 and here he's 32. Also because of like the disparity in their kind of like, I think their living situations. Like here he's like a successful barrister who's living in a nice apartment and has money, and she is a really poor university student, may or may not be kind of squatting or at least like kind of illegally living in an apartment with a bunch of other people. She dabbles in sex work, and I don't know if it's something like kind of like OnlyFans, where she's like sending images or videos of herself to other people or men for money. And they also have kind of like a financially transactional relationship. Now, it's not as if she is prostituting herself to him, but he gives her money and she has sex with him, and he has a really hard time reconciling the difference in the power differential between them, the two of them, and what it means that he gives her money. Is she with him because he gives her money? Is that not a part of the equation at all? There's a lot of questions he has, like both, and because he's a Sally Rooney character, he has no way of communicating this to her and like really being able to like talk about his feelings or his like worries or his questions about it. So that's Peter. He's
and
really
I know you're going to get into the other brother, but I just want to like dip in here for 1 second. Do you ever get Naomi, that story from Naomi's perspective, or is it only from his perspective the whole time?
I don't believe that I really don't think we get Sylvia or Naomi's perspective. We do get obviously Peter and Ivan's perspectives, and then Ivan's romantic interest, Margaret. You do get her perspective, but it is kind of interesting that you don't really know where Naomi falls.
And I don't know if and Naomi ever overlap. Do they ever meet one another?
They do. Okay. They know. I mean, Sylvia knows all about Naomi, because that's the thing. Like this role that Sylvia has in Peter's life, she knows everything about his life and what's going on. And he has told her about Naomi, and I think even expressed maybe to a degree to her about his discomfort with this relationship. And she's very accepting of Naomi, even though there is like this kind of tinge of like, there's like still this like semi-romantic entanglement between he and Sylvia. It's very complex, between them. And then Naomi does know about Sylvia, and I think she has more questions about like, so who really is she to you, and how do you feel about her? And he can't be 100% honest, I don't think, with really either of him about exactly where he falls. So
okay, so
but I do like just so that's Peter, and I do want to. Well, no, we can. I have a little excerpt that I wanted to read, but I don't know if
you want to do. I think it's Ivan is the other brother.
Yeah, let's talk about Ivan first, and then I want to kind of talk a little bit about some Sally Rooneyisms that seem to be pervasive through all of her work that I really found in this book as well.
Okay, so let's
talk about Ivan. So Ivan, as I said, is 22 years old. He's recently graduated from university, chess prodigy, although he kind of like peaked with his like success in chess when he was about 18. And then it's kind of gone downhill from there, due at least in part to the fact that his father was sick, because out of the two brothers, Ivan was the most clearly impacted by his father's death. He lived with his father. He helped care for his father, and he was very emotionally attached to his father. And so he really bore the kind of more obvious brunt of his father's passing. And so he really has been faltering in his chess kind of competitions and his, I guess, success since his father's passing, or really since his father became ill. But we really get to know him. He's in a different part of Ireland. He's traveled because he's participating in a chess competition where he's essentially playing like 10 tandem games, like with 10 different people all at once. And he meets this woman named Margaret, and she is essentially like the director of like the arts and culture center that's putting on this chess competition. And so she's there to just kind of make sure that he's all set, he has everything that he needs. But there's this immediate like spark between the two of them. And turns out she's 36, so she's significantly older than him. So kind of an interesting reversal with Peter and Naomi, although a very different kind of relationship for sure. But yeah, sparks kind of fly between them. And Ivan's interesting because he, out of the two brothers, is the more socially awkward. He's still wearing braces. Like he looks kind of a lot more boyish. He, I think, might have like might even be like kind of on the spectrum. Like I think he would even say that about himself, where he, there's certain like social cues that he just doesn't automatically pick up on. He's not as comfortable in social situations. And whereas Peter is like the kind of charismatic brother. He's the one that I think, I mean, here he is, like he's a successful barrister. So obviously he knows how to talk, knows how to be around people. And it's remarked upon that Peter's like the ladies' man. Like he's the one that always has a girl on his arm, and she's usually really beautiful.
I'm picturing Colin
that
Firth
kind of-
in my mind, but with an Irish accent. And I
Yeah,
guess like
there you go.
the biggest gap that I'm noticing here, and I think this probably will allow you to talk perhaps about some of these Rooney-isms, but there seems to be an absence of a mother character. So is that part of it, and does that play into how this work sort of compares to other Rooney stories?
So there is a mother character. She is in the book. Like you do meet her, you do see interactions with both brothers and their mother, but she, for all intents and purposes, is not involved in their lives. She essentially left their father when, you know, Peter was in his like late teens, early 20s, and Ivan was like barely 10 years old. She left their father for another man who she's still with now, moved away. And so, you know, Peter was an adult at that point. But he, like, Peter doesn't even refer to him as mom. Like, he calls her like actual given name, Christine. And then Ivan doesn't have a great relationship. He ends up only interacting with her because after his father passed away, Ivan had a dog that was living with his father. And neither Peter nor Ivan could take the dog because both of them were living in apartments. And so their mother ended up taking this dog, but she doesn't want the dog. And she's like, you have to get this dog out of my house. I don't want animals. Like, I'm going to give this dog away if you don't come and get this dog. So that's the only reason why, like, Ivan has any kind of interaction. But, like, she's a distant parental figure. So it's really interesting because both parents are absent, really, when it comes down to it. Like, the father is literally absent because he's no longer alive, but the mother is absent because she's just not emotionally or available or nurturing in the way that you would traditionally think of a mother as. But this is definitely something that I feel like we see time and again in a Rooney novel. Like, this is every character I feel like that we interact with the exception of maybe Connell in Normal People, because Connell has a very close relationship with his mother. His mother is awesome and becomes even like a little bit of a maternal figure to the Marianne character in Normal People. But I feel like that is such a big part of her books, is like these kind of absentee or estranged parental figures, and what kinds of impacts that has on respective characters. Even like the Margaret character, who is the love interest of Ivan in this book, she has a strained relationship with her mother. Her mother's really judgmental of her and her kind of living situation, because Margaret, it turns out, is married and has been married for a long time to someone who has a really bad alcohol addiction, but she hasn't divorced him. They stay married even though they don't live together anymore, and her mother has a lot of opinions about that, and so she's not close to her mother before that, because of that, I should say. And even Naomi talks at some point in the book, or when she's, you know, communicating with Peter, talks about how like she did not come from a good home life. Like, that's why she is kind of dependent financially on kind of using her body for money, because she does not have a support system from her family. And then of course you've got the Peter and Ivan characters who.
Do you think that Rooney does that to be is it a generational thing, for one? I mean, where our generation is always critiqued for blaming our parents for everything. But also, do you think that she's also trying to show something about, when people do have those severed relationships, that they struggle more, as an island, rather than if they do allow themselves to be dependent on people or rely on those kind of formative relationships?
I think so. I think the fact that they're another kind of Rooneyism that so I feel like there's like an overlapping, like they go kind of hand in hand together, is that all of her characters have such a hard time communicating with one another. Sometimes the more intense the relationship, the more difficulty or the more barriers there are present in their ability to relate to one another or communicate with one another. And I feel like you could really look at that as a direct effect or impact from maybe having these stunted relationships with your parents, right? Because those are the people that model our communication skills and our ability to be intimate with one another on multiple levels. We're getting that kind of modeled by our parents, by the parental relationships with maybe both parents and how we see them relating to one another, but also in the way that they relate to us. And so when a character has no relationship or a poor relationship with a parent, or is maybe in this case, like with Peter and Ivan, like grieving the loss of a parent, like how does that then present itself to in your romantic life? How does that, I don't know, what does that look like?
And I think the generational piece is there too, because I think that our parents' generation, they were not encouraged to talk through things the way that we are now. And certainly not the way that we really encourage our kids to talk about everything. So yeah, like maybe we're kind of seeing like the trickle down of that too, is like it was never modeled to them, so therefore it was never modeled to us. And then, that inability to communicate, in really also like high stress, high energy kind of scenarios. I listened to a few reviews about this book, and it seems to me like it's kind of unanimous that everybody's like, okay, Rooney is back. Like this book does measure up to the expectations that we all had coming out of Normal People. But then it's interesting about like the comparisons as well. And one of the, this is revealing that I was listening to a woman with a British accent reviewing the book, and she kept referring to the style of the writing, and I cannot tell you whether or not she was describing it as bold, B-O-L-D, or bald, B-A-L-D.
Oh.
And so then my mind was really turning with this, like, what would a bald style? Does she mean sparse? Does she mean stripped back? Like, what does she mean by bald? Or did she mean bold? So I want to put the question to you. Would you use either the word bold or bald to describe the style used in this book?
I mean, I think you could really use both. I like the bald kind of interpretation, in the sense that I was really like, sometimes I would like, I would read a paragraph or I'd read a page, and then I'd kind of stop, and then I'd look at the page, and I'd look at the way that the sentences were structured, or that the paragraph was structured. And like, she has a lot of kind of like, I don't know, like kind of cut off, like non-sentences, like very kind of brief, like snapshots of images that she's using very little words to describe, but somehow, I don't know, like they can get you to where she wants you to go. But it is kind of bald. Like it's not super flowery. It's descriptive without being descriptive at all. But they're like, yeah, like really like 2 or 3 word sentences. They're not even sentences at all. And I'd be like, wow. But it's interesting what she can accomplish with the way that she writes. And then bold, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying about like Rooney is back. And I love that, like I keep seeing like we're so back, baby, like as like a phrase that's being used all over the place now. And I do recall reading this book and thinking, we're so back, baby. And I was messaging you throughout my travel day as I was reading this book. And I remember sitting on the plane, and I sent you a message, and I was like, I think we're like 30 pages in, and there's already been like 2 sex scenes.
We're so back, baby.
And I was like, and I honestly, it was like every 20 pages there was some sort of sex scene, and I was like, okay, all right, we're back. This
But
is
was she
because
like,
Rooney one.
sorry, did
Oh,
you
go
feel
ahead.
like it was salacious, or like was she doing it to be like, I guess they really loved all the sex before, and when I took it out, they didn't like it, so I better make sure I put lots in?
I feel like I'm going to
Pun
give
not
such like
intended. Sorry.
a lame response, but I felt like it made sense for the characters. Like I feel like it's like talking about nudity in movies, and it's just like, but it was crucial to the story that they were naked. Like it was crucial to the story that they were just having sex all the time or having sexual encounters with one another all the time. Like it kind of made sense, like with the Peter and Naomi relationship in particular. But even like there's some like really interesting interactions between Peter and Sylvia, especially knowing that she cannot have sex. And they don't ever get explicitly into exactly what happened to her, what kind of injury, but it sounded terrible. And she's had to have like multiple surgeries. But so there's some, and then with the Ivan and Margaret character, and then you've got like a real May December, you know, she's 36, he's 21. Those are some really interesting kind of sexual encounters that they have too. But I did feel it was really relevant to the story. So it didn't feel gratuitous. It didn't feel like she was just putting it in there for the sake of having it in there. But I feel like Rooney is known, and that would be my other Rooneyism is sex, because like she is known for the way that she writes a sex scene in her book. Like she's actually been praised about like having well written sex scenes, because I mean they can kind of go all over the place, right? Like a sex scene could be great or it could be super corny and it could take you out of it. And I feel like that is one thing that she does well. And I mean, she certainly did it very well in Normal People. I think everybody on the face of the earth who's read that book and or seen that show, which she was a screenwriter on, would agree.
One of
Great
our
sex scenes.
former professors, Dr. Janine Farquharson, said that she was aware of high school teachers teaching that book as a means of, working with students and talking about consent. So,
Yes.
she's definitely doing some important work in that regard too. So, yeah, like you said, not just something to be like, oh, scandalous and, make have the pages turn themselves for that reason, but also that she's getting at something there too. But so she does go after big themes. I know, being critical of capitalism is another big theme that she goes for. Did you see any of that happening in this book as well?
Yes, I feel like of all of those kind of elements that we've just discussed are present. But the thing that I really, especially in thinking about this book and thinking about our conversation today, that really kind of hit home for me was that kind of criticism of capitalism that I feel like is underlying in every single story that she writes. I think it's very pronounced in Normal People, but I think that she's really returned to that in Intermezzo as well. And so a lot of the excerpts that I actually had picked out for today have to deal with that. And like this idea of money and what money means, wealth, and how money tends to be like the relationship that we have. Everything is transactional, right? Like if I give you money, you give me something in return. So especially like in the idea of Peter and Naomi, for example, like he's giving her money, and so in return, is she giving him sex? Is that truly the crux of their relationship? Um, or can there be a way where you are giving money because you have money to give, and the person that you care about needs it?
Right.
And
Do you have,
so
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I
Let's hear this
do.
passage. Yeah.
I do have a couple. So the first thing I wanted to read was this interaction that Peter and Naomi have. This is pretty early in the book. It's like 66 pages in. And so Peter and Naomi are texting one another, and she essentially is kind of like, I'm like saying like I'm kind of hard up for cash, like I don't have any money right now. And so he is offering to give her money, and she thanks him, and then she messages him to say like, oh, are you around tomorrow night? And he says, I'm not sure yet. And she says, okay, cool. And he thinks about this afterwards, this exchange that they've just had, like both the text exchange, but then the like financial exchange that they just had. And so it says, in an effort to emphasize that he expects nothing in return for his money, thinks nothing of it, and may not even be available in any case to collect on the debt his money very pointedly does not incur. Then, on a purely human interpersonal level, she feels hurt and rejected by his coldness, maybe. Someone just seems like they have to be exploiting someone here. But who and how? He, her, financially, sexually, or she, him, financially, emotionally? It can be exploitative to give money, also to take it. Money, overall, a very exploitative substance. Creating it seems fresh kinds of exploitation in every form and relationality through which it passes, greasing with exploitation the wheels of human interaction generally. Now he feels bad and actually does want to call her, to hear her gossiping about her friends or describing what she's reading for college, to interject occasionally with unsolicited advice or commentary. That kind of thing. But it's too late. Why does everything have to be so complicated? He knows why. Flashing eyes of two animals through the undergrowth. Yes, what they want from each other. So, I don't know. I thought that was like a telling, I don't know, like this idea of like, he feels taken advantage of in a certain respect, but then he feels like he's taking advantage of her. But he doesn't really know what to think about it. Like, who is the one that's taking advantage or exploiting the other person? And it's all almost through money. And so I felt like that right there was just like a little pointed dig at like money corrupts everything.
Because sometimes I feel like money is seen as the only thing that has true value, right? That it's like the ultimate currency, obviously. But then if we kind of like pan out from that a little bit, like, you know, lots of things are valuable to us beyond money, and we exchange those, you know, without the same level of concern, right? Like somehow giving cash in certain contexts to someone as a gift is seen as crass. Whereas if you purchase something with that same money and then hand it to them, it's a thoughtful gift instead. So, you know, I do think that we have I think it's like a tense relationship with money and then how it's exchanged. So I love that she does that within the context of the relationship too, so that you're curious about what their feelings are for each other and whether those feelings are genuine or if they come from an authentic place once money is part of it. Yeah, I think though, Sarah, at this moment, it's time for me to ask you what your opinions truly are on this book by asking you the question and I'm going to hold up my copy too. We don't have time to talk about this, but the Canadian copy is different. Wow.
I really think it's a British, like, I feel like you probably have the UK version and I have the American version. This happened with Harry Potter too.
And it looks like the cover of a spy novel to me, but there's still a chess piece. There's still some consistencies there. But I love comparing these and seeing like what did they think that Canadians would be? Why did they think Canadians would be more drawn to this than that? Who knows? But based on your recommendations, would you say that Intermezzo by Sally Rooney is a could read, a should read, or a must read?
I am going to call Intermezzo by Sally Rooney a solid should read.
Ooh, I totally thought you were going must. Okay, dish.
I think I'm going to start really reining in my must reads. But I think, because I think Sally Rooney is certainly not necessarily for everyone. I really do like her as a writing, and I will say, like 3 out of 4 books that were all published within between 2017 and 2024. That's super prolific, insanely prolific. The fact that 3 out of her 4 books are very good books is saying something. I would call Normal People a must read. I would call this a really, really, really solid should read.
Amazing.
So.
Well, I cannot wait to sink my teeth into this, and I think we'll probably revisit it when it comes to the holiday, the year-end roundup, which is going to happen in December. So I'm looking forward to reading this, and I'm definitely going to have that lens on, looking for certainly the capitalism critiques, certainly the communication stuff, parent relationships, and let's face it, I'm going to be looking for the sex too. Oh, this is awesome, Sarah. Thanks so much for this wonderful conversation. I was so glad I finally got to hear your stories about, great experiences with fellow readers of the Secret Reader Society all over, and looking forward to reading Intermezzo and talking to you about it again sometime soon.
Love it. Thanks, Melissa. And thanks to Rogers TV.